Welcome back to Normal Ireland Live. I'm Callum Taylor, aka Political, and I'm your host this evening. And tonight I am joined by the crafty little witch, Emma. Hi, Emma. Pleasure to have you on the
Hello,
show.
everybody.
How are you doing this evening? You all right?
I'm okay, yeah, looking forward to another episode of Completely Normal Island on this completely normal island where everything is completely normal.
Absolutely. Completely normal island. Everything is completely normal. Now, that said, let's get started. So, before we take a look at tonight's stories, I'd just like to ask that you all please make sure that you get involved with the conversation this evening in the comments section. And don't forget to like this video, hit the subscribe button. And if you're watching on Twitter, you can hit the retweet button or repost and help us to reach new audiences. So, stories tonight. MP Rosie Duffield has quit the Labour Party, citing the government's cruel and unnecessary policies as her reason for leaving. Just Stop Oil activists have thrown soup over Van Gogh's sunflowers just hours after fellow protesters are jailed. Pollster John Curtis says the 2024 election may be the election in which the two-party system effectively died a death. And 7 in 10 Brits say that Labour in power feels the same as the Tories in power. Now, the Labour Party's resident transphobe, Rosie Duffield, left the party on Saturday, becoming the fastest MP to leave a party after a general election in modern history. In her resignation letter, she stated, "Although many last straws have led to my decision, my reason for leaving now is the programme of policies you seem determined to stick to, however unpopular they are with the electorate and your own MPs. You repeat often that you will make the tough decisions and that the country is all in this together, but those decisions do not directly affect any one of us in Parliament. They are cruel and unnecessary and affect hundreds of thousands of our poorest, most vulnerable constituents. This is not what I was elected to do. It is not even wise politics, and it certainly is not," quotes, "the politics of service." Now, it is worth pointing out that I don't necessarily disagree with the points that Duffield is making here. And she does go on in her letter to reference the deeply shameful treatment of Diane Abbott recently, and also the revelations of hypocrisy that she describes as, quote, staggering and increasingly outrageous. But let's not forget Duffield's own record. In May 2020, she had to resign from a position on the front bench for breaking lockdown rules to meet with her married lover. In 2022, she accepted tickets to the Open Golf Championship worth 350 quid, which is perfectly within the rules, I might add. But if you're going to be angry with Starmer for accepting gifts, despite technically being within the rules, you best make sure that you've never done the same thing. And of course, her ongoing disdain and hate for the trans community in the name of protecting women's rights, which even extended to seemingly endorsing Holocaust revisionism on Twitter. Now, in her exclusive interview with the Times newspaper, Duffield maintained her transphobia. I mean, her gender-critical views were not why she was leaving the party. She said, "With my gender-critical views, all I wanted was for those views to be taken seriously and discussed. And I think as a movement, the Labour Party has shifted and we are talking about those things now," she said. "I and others put it on the agenda by basically being very loud about women's rights. And I am glad it is now a mainstream discussion, but that's not why I'm leaving the Labour Party. The Labour Party, has left me." Now, I've been calling for Duffield's suspension for a while now. In fact, the Labour Party's refusal to act on her transphobia was one of the reasons that I left the party last year. And I'm not the only one that's angry that she was even given the privilege of being able to leave the party on her own terms. Taking to Twitter, Labour MP and member of the Socialist Campaign Group, Nadia Whittome, said, "No matter your views on her stated reasons for quitting, Rosie Duffield has made a political career out of dehumanising one of the most marginalised groups in society. She should never have been allowed the privilege of resigning. Labour should have withdrawn the whip long ago." And of course, the Queen of the TERFs and friend of Rosie Duffield, J.K. Rowling, had to get in her twopence worth as well, responding to Nadia Whittome. She said on Twitter, "Rosie Duffield was one of the few female Labour politicians with the guts to stand up for vulnerable women and girls, while self-satisfied numbskulls like you fought to give away their rights and spaces. Too long didn't read? Keep her name out of your mouth." another display of grown-up behaviour there from Joanne. Emma, I want to bring you back in on this. Do you think she's right, or do you agree with me that she comes across as a hypocrite who is throwing the toys out of the pram because many in the party are sick of her rhetoric?
Yeah, I am completely on the same page as you. Like, it is an absolute disgrace and an embarrassment that she was ever allowed the privilege to be able to resign. Like, she should have been fired or had the whip withdrawn a very, very long time ago. So yeah, it is a complete stain upon Labour, but it's unsurprising because it's Keir Starmer's Labour. But there we go. And like, also, I don't know why she's bringing up Diane Abbott. That's very confusing to me. She has never once mentioned her before, ever. Never said anything when Diane was going through what she was going through.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
like, why is she bringing her up?
Laura Kuenssberg asked her whether she thought the Labour, whether she thought Keir Starmer had a problem with women. To which she responded, "Yes, he does." And I think the Diane Abbott thing's probably sort of in that, but it feels very much to me like she's looking for an excuse to leave.
She's looking for something to weaponize in this situation, which is kind of gross.
Mhm.
Particularly the fact that she's a white woman and Diane Abbott is a black woman, and she faced really abhorrent racism. And Miss Duffield said nothing, so I
Mhm.
don't know why she's bringing her up now.
And,
Um,
and don't get me wrong.
Very
I
weird.
mean, some of the other reasons that she's citing for leaving, and also, the situation with Diane Abbott, I agree. It was utterly shameful the way that the Labour Party dealt with Diane Abbott. It was absolutely appalling the way that Keir Starmer dealt with Diane Abbott. In fact, Diane Abbott has said herself recently that I think she was quoted as saying she'd never had a nice conversation with Keir Starmer. But it feels as though it feels very opportunistic to me. She's had a look at what's been going on. She's looked at the stories in the press recently, and she's thought, "Is this a good enough excuse for me to go?" And I do have to wonder whether she's gone before she was pushed. Although, like I said, I've been calling for her to be suspended for years, and
Mm.
they've not gotten rid of her. I mean, do you think that had she continued to remain in the party, do you think the party would have got rid of her?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I think they're all cut from the same cloth. So I genuinely don't know. I don't know if there was any rumors of that happening, like it's
Hmm.
unbeknownst to me, but if I was to put that aside, then I don't think that they would have. I think they would have kept her on because yeah, she's just another one of Keir Starmer's Red Labour MPs. Not with Red Labour. What am I saying? Sorry, guys. Um,
I know what you
or
mean.
Keir Starmer's Labour MP. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting that she has also updated her Twitter profile pictures with this, because up until literally a couple of days ago, excuse me, up until literally a couple of days ago, her Twitter profile header picture and her actual profile picture were connected to the situation that went on with the boxer during the Olympics, where she had a photograph, and the statement 2024, the year that violence against women became an Olympic sport.
Oh, I
And
hope Imam Khalif sues the shit out of her.
well,
Oh,
there is an ongoing lawsuit that I'm aware of, that Khalif's taken, on her, and I think, well, I know that J.K. Rowling's name's come up with that. I don't know whether Rosie Duffield's has, um, but this was an elected official for the Labour Party who had that as a profile picture on Twitter, and she's only changed it now that she's left the Labour Party to a bird flying free. To represent her freedom from the grasp of the party, that's what it is now. It's an artistic image. So, um, yeah. Have I frozen?
you have, yeah.
I thought I had. Very good. But you can still hear me, okay?
I can still hear you, yeah.
Oh, don't we just love it when we have technical difficulties? Bear with me. Right. You just keep chatting. I'll be right back.
No problem. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, Rosie Duffield. But yeah, and her also in getting involved in Holocaust revisionism. Like,
Yeah, so you
That's anti-Semitism.
well, that was a situation where we had a
J.K.
situation
Rowling made a
where
tweet and
no,
denied that
well, so there was
she
two. There
denied
was
that gay people were ever victims of the Holocaust, and everybody was like, "Hey,
there
yes, they
was
were."
yeah, there was that one, and there was the Glinner tweet. There was the Graham Linehan tweet where he tweeted essentially again saying that trans people were never targeted in the Holocaust, which Rosie Duffield had liked. She'd been called out for liking that tweet, and then absolutely nothing was done about it.
Oh, it's very
She was just
embarrassing.
allowed to get away with it. So I mean, it's seeming to endorse that. I mean, it's worth pointing out as well that this whole saga has once again raised the really serious question as to what should happen when MPs resign from their party. I mean, she was
Mm.
elected on a Labour mandate less than 100 days ago. And it's also worth pointing out, she also accepted £10,000 worth of donations from one single donor towards her campaign for said election. And now she's become
Who
the
was that
fastest.
donor?
I'm not sure who it was. I'm not sure if it's public knowledge or not who that individual donor was. But it's known that she did accept a donation of £10,000. But after accepting that donation and standing on a Labour ticket in the election, she's become the fastest MP to resign from their party following a general election. I mean, surely the people of Canterbury deserve a by-election now.
Mm. I agree, absolutely. I think they should, yeah, get the chance to elect an MP that represents a party of their choosing. If they've elected her based on the fact that she's a member of Labour and has now left, I don't think that's very democratic. I don't know about you. I don't know about you
No, I
guys in the
completely
chat.
agree. Yeah, let us know in the chat what you think. Do you think there should be a by-election in Canterbury? I mean, it makes me really angry when MPs do this, but I think what's worse is that she's had a problem with Starmer for a long time. This idea that she's just suddenly developed a conscience now. I mean, something else that she mentioned in a resignation letter was Keir Starmer's inability to deal with anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Now, regardless of where you stand on anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and, how bad you think or not that that problem was,
I
if
mean,
she's
Holocaust
if
revisionism's pretty anti-Semitic, in my opinion.
exactly.
I don't know about you guys.
Exactly. I mean, it was one of the things that multiple people cited when they put in complaints about her. Now, she was investigated for transphobia, and that included that tweet, and she was found to not have broken any rules and not be doing anything wrong. I don't know how they came to that conclusion. Um, but yeah, when you look at the fact that she's quoting Starmer's inability to deal with anti-Semitism, yet she remained a member of the party, to my knowledge. Someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but she's been an MP since Corbyn was in power, and she certainly didn't seem to have an issue with anti-Semitism then. So, and that's when everyone was reporting on it, when it was, as Corbyn said, used as a political football. But there was a problem with anti-Semitism. It wasn't anywhere near the size and scale as it was made out to be. We know that Morgan McSweeney and his friends were heavily involved in spinning that story and turning it into a much bigger issue, which actually made it difficult for genuine cases of anti-Semitism to be properly investigated. In fact, there was actually an active campaign within the party to deliberately not deal with genuine cases of anti-Semitism or slow the speed in which they were dealing with them in order to try and smear Corbyn. So for Duffield to have seen all that and see the immediate aftermath when Starmer took power, the publication of the Ford Report, for example, which highlighted a hierarchy of racism within the party, for her to sit by and see all of that, for her to sit by and watch the way that Diane Abbott was treated as well, and then suddenly decide after a general election, after a £10,000 donation to a campaign, and after guaranteeing herself 5 more years in a fairly well-paid job, all of a sudden she has a conscience on these issues. Seems a bit
Mm.
odd to me.
Little bit sus.
Just a bit. Do you not
It's a
do you
little
not
bit
agree?
suspicious. It's a little bit suspicious. What are you doing, Rosie? Babes, we
It
see
is it
you.
it is an odd situation though, don't you think, to suddenly have grown a conscience now?
Absolutely, yeah. Like where did it come from? I don't understand.
Oh, dear me. Yeah. I
Maybe we'll
just,
find out in the coming weeks what her
well,
true motivations are.
it will be interesting to see. I mean, there was a huge saga whereby she was struggling to have any contact with Keir Starmer. She wanted to have a conversation with him and meet with him over the quote unquote women's rights issues, otherwise known as Rosie Duffield's transphobia issues. And
Mm.
there was a lot of back and forth there about how, well, Keir Starmer's, he's not doing enough to protect women. I mean, I had the opposite issue with him. I thought he wasn't doing enough to protect trans people by allowing people like Rosie Duffield to continue to have a voice in the party. So,
Absolutely, and I think people, and as you can sort of see it as her from her profile picture, she's a danger to cis women. Like Iman Khalif is a cis woman. Um, like she's not trans or anything like that. She's a North African Arab woman, and she doesn't have Eurocentric features. And for some reason, when transphobes see women with non-Eurocentric looking features, they start like yapping, and that relates directly back to the fact that transphobes are basically secretly Nazis. Yeah.
well, I mean, with when it comes to the Holocaust revisionism from that Duffield seems to endorse, I don't know whether it's so much of a secret, but yeah, I'm just not entirely certain why. Well, I know I am certain why she's chosen now. She's chosen now because she's just secured 5 more years in a very well-paid job, which I
Exactly.
think,
Yes. So I think that the residents of her constituency are very much entitled to another election.
yeah. The problem is with that is that when we had a spate of Conservative MPs jumping ship and joining the Labour Party before the general election, people like Natalie Elphicke, for example, who crossed the floor. Now, granted, she was standing down, but there was no call from Labour at that point to say there should be a by-election in these constituencies. So if the Labour Party now were to try and argue against Duffield and say, well, you need to call a by-election, then that just adds to the hypocrisy that we've seen from the party everywhere else, because it
Yeah,
puts
it'd
them in
be
a bit of a
funny if they
difficult
did, though.
situation.
It'd be funny if they did, because it would be juicy tea for us to
It
talk
it
about, to be honest.
it wouldn't surprise me if they did,
Okay.
considering
Exactly, it wouldn't
um,
surprise me either.
considering everything else.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's Rosie Duffield. Anyhow,
Right.
let's move on
Sorry.
to our
Sorry, guys.
next story. 2 Just Stop Oil activists were sentenced to time in prison at Southwark Crown Court on Friday for throwing soup over Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery in October 2022. Phoebe Plummer was jailed for 2 years for the soup throwing, plus 3 months for a Section 7 offence, while Anna Hollins received a prison sentence of 20 months. Now, if you ask me, these sentences are ridiculous, especially at a time when we have people like Hugh Edwards, for example, getting shorter suspended sentences for possessing some of the most appalling images of child abuse imaginable. This was a painting that was protected behind a pane of glass. Let's remind ourselves at what happened.
Security!
What is worth more, art or life? Is it worth more than food? Worth more than justice? Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people? The cost of living crisis is part of the cost of oil crisis. Fuel is unaffordable to millions of cold, hungry families. They can't even afford to heat a tin of soup.
Now, immediately following the sentencing on Friday, 3 more Just Stop Oil activists took to the National Gallery to repeat the action, throwing more soup over 2 Van Gogh's paintings.
Oh my God, why are you people in prison, demanding an end to new oil and gas, something which is now government policy. After sustained disruptive actions, countless headlines, and the resulting political pressure, future generations will regard these prisoners of conscience to be on the right side of history.
Now, on Friday afternoon, Turn Left contacted the National Gallery for comment, and they sent us the following statement. At just after 2:30 p.m. this afternoon, 3 people entered room 6 of the National Gallery Van Gogh Poets and Lovers exhibition. They appeared to throw a soup-like substance over 2 works, Sunflowers, 1888, National Gallery, London, and Sunflowers, 1889, Philadelphia Museum of Art. Police were called and 3 people have been arrested. The paintings were removed from display and examined by a conservator and were unharmed. We are aiming to reopen the exhibition as soon as possible, and we are not commenting further at this stage. Following the arrests on Friday, the 3 protesters have this afternoon been granted bail at Westminster Magistrates Court. Friday's sentencing took place against the backdrop of a flooded Britain following extreme weather across the country last week, with more flood warnings already issued for the week ahead. I can't help but think that we should be listening to climate protesters as opposed to banging them up for throwing soup. Emma, what are your thoughts on this story? I mean, do you think these sentences are appropriate? And what do you think should happen to the protesters that repeated the action on Friday?
I thought it was funny of them. Sorry. There's the fact that the other 2 had just been sentenced and they've done it again. But yeah, no, we really need to start listening to climate change protesters. Excuse me. It may seem really silly and really feeble, what they're doing and annoying, but I just would like to draw attention to what's happening in the US right now with Hurricane Helene. In North Carolina and Tennessee, they're saying that it's going to be worse, or the aftermath is going to be worse, or on the same level as Hurricane Katrina. So they've had like a lot of flash flooding, and because of obviously it's flash flooding, people haven't had like proper warning or chance to evacuate. So, you know, a lot of people have died. People have lost their homes, their businesses, their pets, animals, livestock. At the moment, I think there's one particular town, I think it was in Tennessee, that has been completely cut off because all of the bridges that lead into that town have all been destroyed and there's no cell service. People obviously can't get food. It is disastrous. And if people remember Hurricane Katrina and the actions of the US government during that time, they basically did nothing. They left people to fend for themselves. There were some of the most horrific stories. Like this one that really sticks with me is a prison where the guards basically they all left and just left people in their cells, locked in their cells. And apparently, out of 500 prisoners, there 100 remained because all of the ones on the lower levels all drowned, and all the ones on the top floor could hear them screaming and were like banging on the floor to provide them reassurance. And apparently, eventually, it went silent. So, like, yeah.
And I mean that was
only,
was then, you know. So I mean,
exactly.
Now we're seeing an increase in extreme weather events like this.
Exactly,
So there's
and
going to be more.
they're saying that this is worse. The aftermath is going to be worse than Katrina. Obviously, it's just happened, so a lot of the images that we're seeing are still very fresh. But like when they've started draining stuff and the cleanup, it's so bad. And like we've also had flash flooding in the UK here. There's been some in Devon. There's been some in Cambridgeshire where people's and Birmingham, people's homes have been flooded, and in Nepal has had really bad flash flooding, and like don't think
Emma,
that this won't affect you.
In the context of no, it's all right. It's all right. In the context of all of that, then, I mean, what do you make of these sentences? I mean, 2 years for Phoebe for
Ridiculous.
throwing soup at a painting. I mean,
a little bit of soup left behind a bit of glass.
She
and
was,
then, like you said, you got Hugh
when
Edwards
she was first.
suspended sentence.
Exactly, and that's the point, because I mean, when she first went to court, she was found guilty of criminal damage up to the value of about £5,000. I think it was. I think that was damage to the frame. Now it'd be interesting to see what happens in the repeats offence, because the National Gallery told us that the painting was unharmed. What they didn't say was whether there was any damage to the frame, or whether there was a cost associated with having the conservator look at the painting and the two paintings and make sure that they were okay, etc. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in this case. But for criminal damage to the value of £5,000, which is what she was found guilty of, which is for damage to the frame,
out of.
She's got a 2-year prison sentence. Hugh Edwards was in possession of child pornography, and he got 12 months suspended sentence. I mean, he's not even going to face time in jail.
I can't remember what category it was, but it was like one of the really nasty categories, like one of the gross ones. So it was really like pernicious.
Yeah, it was category A, which is the worst possible.
All of it, yeah, all of it's pernicious, but it's particularly pernicious. But yeah, category A, so that's like one of the worst things. And I don't understand it. It's like, you know, those people that also got like a prison sentence of like 5 years or something for participating in a Zoom call, and then Hugh Edwards is like, oh yeah,
and that was just up oil again. In fact, I believe, I might be mistaken, I believe it was the same judge. Now it's interesting because the example that a lot of people point to when making comparisons is that of the suffragettes, right? Now, they didn't just stand with placards. In fact, they went further even than Just Stop Oil, who are a non-violent group. The suffragettes used violence to get their voices heard. You know, I mean, Emma, you heard the protester in the second clip there saying future generations will regard these prisoners of conscience to be on the right side of history. I mean, what do you think? Do you think history will look back as favorably on Just Stop Oil as it does the suffragette movement?
Yeah, so it particularly, like, depending, like, I don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully things will improve and we'll be able to, you know, go forward into a future that looks a bit like, solar, like sort of solar punky. If anybody's familiar with like solar punk, you know, that'd be nice. Or maybe we'll go into a dystopian fucking future. Who knows? Either way, what I think that they'll look back and say, it'll either be, I'm glad we ended up listening to those guys. That was a really good thing. Look at how great things are. Or, fuck, we should have listened to those guys. And I really hope it's not the latter. You know?
I worry it will be the latter.
Me too, yeah.
Especially with the way things are going. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I understand people's anger, especially when they're blocking, roads and it's causing problems with traffic. But I mean, Just Stop Oil themselves tweeted recently pictures of the flooded motorway, the motorways that were completely underwater. And they just said, who's going to be arrested for this? You know, the disruption that these protesters cause is minimal compared to the disruption that we've seen this week caused by extreme freak weather events. And there's going to be more of those, as you say. You know, we've got, and it's not just here in the UK, like you've alluded to. It's happened in America. We've had it in Nepal. There's been problems in Australia. You know, we see it globally, and this problem will get worse. Now,
there's another one brewing in the Caribbean right now.
Exactly. And is throwing soup going to resolve that? Absolutely not. But is it going to give these people the opportunity to get on national television and once again remind people that we need to act on this? Absolutely. Because it does feel to me that the only time the press listen to the climate crisis is when people like Just Stop Oil go out and cause a bit of disruption, and then they'll talk about it.
Exactly, yeah.
Anyway, we should probably move on. So before we move on to our next story, I just want to say that if you like what we do, you can subscribe and you can share our content. There are now 5 of us contributing to Turn Left. However, it is all still voluntary. And in order for us to dedicate more time to Turn Left, to upgrade the quality and prevent cameras freezing live on air, like mine did earlier, and to become a fully realised media organisation, we do need your help. So you can support us by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly, or you can give us a one-off donation. However, we do, of course, understand that not everyone can contribute financially, and that's okay. So you can also support us by engaging with our content, subscribing to the YouTube channel, following our social media accounts, and you could even clip and share our content on your own channels too. Let's grow a socialist media alternative to take on the establishment commentariat, and you can be a part of the journey. Now, speaking of you being part of the journey, let's go and see some of your comments. Let's have a look. Double D, welcome. Hi again. Unionize the unemployed. Interesting concept. Not thought of it before. I mean, that's a great idea. Unionize the unemployed. Why do we have such a big number of unemployed people in this country? Why are people unemployed? Are people struggling to get work? Are people not able to get work? I've been looking for a new job recently myself, and I've been struggling, you know. So I think unionizing the unemployed, great idea. Let's do it. Let's do it. What's next? Phil S. Norwich Guitar wants to get ahead of the Starmer affair headlines Damo was hinting at. Yeah. There's been talk about that, Emma. Well, it's unconfirmed. I want to preface this with the fact that these are rumors, and I don't like to get into the realms of conspiracy theory. But there is talk around the town at the moment that things are not all as they seem in the Starmer household. Let's put it that way. Whether there's any truth in that, who knows? But even if there isn't truth in that, people always want there to be another story, you know, or they want to get ahead of things. So, I mean, maybe that is what Duffield's doing. She's thinking, well, if this big story is going to break soon, I better get out now before my story is overshadowed. Any more comments? Les Watts. Harry Potter was just a rehash of public school twaddle that should have been put in the dustbin of history after the introduction of comprehensive education. Lots of people read them, though. I am one of those people that read the Harry Potter books, and I'm one of those people who, for all J.K. Rowling's terrible, terrible qualities, do still like the world that she created. However, the more I go back and read over it, the more I find it full of very problematic stereotypes, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's blatant racism, you know, or the rest of it. So I don't completely agree with that one, Les, but I appreciate the sentiment. And Hayfield, I think Diane Abbott is enjoying slagging off Keir Starmer. Can you blame her? Seriously,
Yeah,
can you blame her? Especially the way that she's been treated by him all this time, you know. And the fact of the matter is it was very hit and miss, right? Hit and miss. It was very hit and miss right before the election whether she was even going to be able to stand on a Labour ticket. So the fact that Starmer sat on the results of the internal investigation into her that found that she was absolutely fine to be given the whip back, and then didn't do anything with it, I think I'd want to be slagging off Keir Starmer as well if I was her. Yeah, good point, Anne. Any more? Janice J. Under Starmer, more Jews have been disciplined or expelled than under any other leader. All were anti-Zionist, of course. Yeah, so in the Labour Party, you are 3 times more likely to be expelled for anti-Semitism if you are Jewish than if you are of any other background or religion. And when you say that out loud and actually think about the connotations of that, it is pretty horrific. In fact, I interviewed a lady outside Labour conference recently. In fact, I think you can watch the interview on the YouTube page. I think it's on our channel now. And she told me the fact that she's Jewish and she's a Jewish member of the Labour Party. She was expelled for anti-Semitism because she disagrees with the ongoing genocide. Make it make sense. Yeah. Double D again. I'm not sure why artwork should be the target. Yeah, and a lot of people have made that argument. Why go after the artwork? The simplest answer is it gets headlines, right? People care more, like Phoebe alluded to the first time around, people care more about a Van Gogh painting being vandalized than they do about the vandalism of the planet. And that seems to be the line that Just Stop Oil often seem to go down, especially when they go after, like it was the same with Stonehenge. It's been the same with other instances when they've gone after art installations or statues or things like that. The value that people in this country seem to put on a painting is strangely higher than the value that they put on the planet. And when you also take into account the fact that the painting never actually gets damaged, there was some damage to the frame the first time around. Whether there is this time, we don't know. The National Gallery told us the paintings were unharmed, but they didn't mention otherwise regarding the frames. Why do people care more about a vandalized painting than they do about climate change? And because they care more about it, it hits the headlines. It gets them an invite to GB News, not GB News, Good Morning Britain, probably GB News as well, actually, and other platforms where they can go and talk about what's going on. I'm not saying they should go to GB News. I'm saying that GB News asked them on. But if you're trying to teach people about the ramifications and the real life consequences of climate change, and people are not listening, you have to find new ways to reach out to them and get them to listen to what you have to say. Is it right? You tell me, but it's certainly getting them coverage. Flow Snake. I had mixed feelings about the soup chucking, but with the excessive sentencing, the real two-tier justice, exactly. I'm now fully behind the baked chuckers. Fear tactics don't win. Governments never forget that. And I think that's why more protesters went and did exactly the same action, hours after they've gone, the friends have gone to prison. It's highly likely that the three that threw the soup over the two sunflower paintings on Friday are also going to end up going to prison. I don't see how a court could not sentence them to prison time when they've just sentenced Phoebe and Anna to prison time for doing exactly the same thing. The only way that they could do that would be to essentially, acquit the two that are in prison and let them out. But I can't see it happening. So they did it knowing they were going to go to prison again, because I think they're trying to say, look, you can send us to prison, but you're not going to silence us, which I think is pretty brave of them, to be fair. Any more for any more? Ali, happy to see Emma on the live. You got a fan, Emma?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
We're happy to have you. Any more? Becca A. Protests are meant to cause a nuisance, or no one would pay attention. There's so many examples of protests that we don't hear of because they are too quiet. Completely agree with you there, Becca. Completely agree. Luna Rose, great show tonight, as always, gang. Thanks, Luna Rose. We appreciate it. Any more? My pal Foot became a YouTube member. Thank you very much. And you can become a YouTube member too if you wish. We are obviously grateful for everyone that's a member of the channel, and those of you that gift memberships to others too. Wonderful. Now, let's move on. In an interview with Times Radio this morning, everyone's favourite polling expert, Sir John Curtis, has claimed that 2024 may be the election in which the two-party system effectively died a death.
Well, the first thing about the 2024 election is that the big parties can no longer assume that the contest is simply between them. It's perfectly obvious in the case of the Conservatives, for example, that while, yes, they need to get back around the 1 in 8 people who switched to Labour from them, they need to get the roughly 1 in 4 who switched to Reform. So they've got to have a strategy that deals with two parties. Equally, the Labour Party actually also has to start worrying about the Greens, because it's clear that they're beginning to pick up votes off Labour, particularly amongst younger voters. And that all our parties now are going to have to realise that 2024 may be the election in which the two-party system eventually effectively died a death, and that we're certainly now in the short run in a situation where all the parties have to think of a strategy that appeals to apparently diverse groups and enables them to bring them back together. And that, to that extent, at least, politics has got a lot more complicated.
Politics has got a lot more complicated, he says. I mean, I have to agree with Sir John Curtis here, and it prompts me to ask the question, has the first past the post system finally run its course? I mean, Emma, what do you reckon?
Oh, God, I hope so. I hope so. The two-party system is absolutely disastrous. It has been for years. It has held us back so much. It does. If it hasn't died, it needs to die. But I hope he's right. Or like, I hope it doesn't turn into like a second two-party system where it's like Labour and Reform. Like, no, thank you very much.
I mean,
yeah,
don't get me wrong. I'm not, like you mentioned Reform there. Obviously, we have seen a rise in the number of seats that parties like Reform are getting. The votes fairly similar to UKIP in 2015 in terms of people voting for them, but in terms of actual making a difference in terms of the shape in Westminster, there's definitely been a change. And we are seeing the rise of the far right in other places. I mean, we've just seen it on Sunday in Austria, and we're seeing more examples of it, across Europe too. But there's also been a rise on the left. We've got 4 Green MPs now, whereas previously we only had 1. So, we've got more people voting for the Green Party than ever before, and we've got more Green councillors than ever before. And as Sir John Curtis refers to, I think we are seeing a rise in people voting for other parties. I mean, do you think that will just continue into the next general election, or do you think that this year has just been a bit of a fluke and that everything will go back to the status quo come 2029?
Well, 2029 we'll have a whole new demographic of voters. We'll have, is it Generation A? Will they be voting, or is it the younger Zoomers?
The young Gen Zs, definitely, yeah.
But like, is it Gen Alpha that start getting the vote, or am I thinking way ahead? But anyway, a whole new demographic of people. So people at the moment who are going to be about 14, 15, or maybe obviously younger than that, by come the next election, they are going to be obviously able to vote. I think it's less likely that they're going to vote for right-wing parties.
Yeah.
So
the problem though that we have is that under first past the post, if you have more people voting for smaller parties, what you end up with is a situation where kind of like what we've got this time, where you end up with one party getting a whopping majority on a tiny percentage of the vote share. I mean, if you look at the share of the vote that the Labour Party have got in this election, they've got less. They've got a lower vote share and less votes than what the party got under Jeremy Corbyn when we lost 2 elections. And now they've got a whopping majority. I mean, bigger, massive in comparison to the super majority that everyone talked about under Boris Johnson. But in a situation where more people haven't voted for them. I mean, I think there's a simple answer to this, right? Change the voting system. We need proportional representation now more than ever. I'm grateful that Reform UK have only got 5 seats, but it's not democratic that a party with more total votes than the Liberal Democrats get 5 seats, while the Lib Dems get 72. I mean, surely it's a time for change.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And like, I don't know how you feel about this, but like in some countries they've introduced mandatory voting. So even if you want to go and spoil your ballot, like you can still do that. But like that would still give an indication, like even if there's more spoiled ballots than there are votes for like a single party, then that would be a good indication that all the parties, need a reform and none of them are good enough for the country.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence when it comes to mandatory voting. I think there is a case for it, but I also think otherwise. My sort of view is to just encourage as many people to use their vote as possible. And if that means spoiling your ballot paper, then spoil your ballot paper. But I will always encourage people. You'll never hear me telling anybody not to bother voting. You will always hear me saying, if you don't want to vote, go anyway, or, send off your postal vote, whatever, and just spoil your ballot. Because those spoiled ballots, they do get counted at the count when the votes are tallied and the declarations are made. The number of spoiled ballots and also why they were classed as spoiled, that's all read out from the stage of the community centre or the sports hall or wherever it is that they end up happening to be on election night, the little local village green, whatever. But they stand there and they say, votes for this party, X number, votes for that party, X number of spoiled ballots, this is how many. Spoiled because you couldn't make out who they'd voted for, X number, spoiled because they identified the individual, X number, whatever. So those numbers are counted and they are recorded. But I'm not sure that mandatory voting is necessarily. I'd need to hear more of the arguments on either side for that. I mean, what do you guys think in the comments?
I was about to say, what do you think, chat?
Yeah, I'm always a bit apprehensive when it comes to forcing people to do it. I think the beauty of our democracy is that people are free to choose to engage with it. But there's, you know, there is an argument to be had that it should be made mandatory. But yeah, in terms of the death of the two-party system, I mean, look, I hope John Curtis is right about that. I think it's about time that we see the end of Labour and the Conservatives, especially when they seem to be two and of the same at the moment. I mean, we'll move on to that in a moment, but when we've got two parties that aren't really offering much difference, but a system that means that it's always going to be one or the other that make it into power. Every now and then you might get someone like the Lib Dems coming along and forming a coalition to help out. It needs to change, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think so. Sorry, I'm just having a quick nosy at some of your comments. I'll just bring this one up from Jacqueline, who said, also with ballot initiatives, even if you don't like any of the candidates, you can at least vote on some of the policies. I mean, I do think that it's important to vote on policies, but I think it's right that we I don't know. I get really conflicted with it. I think it's right that we don't force anybody to vote, that everybody has the right to. I think it needs to be easier for people to vote. So I'm all in favour of automatic voter registration, so that everybody's registered. I'm all in favour of scrapping the voter ID that the Tories brought in, which we know was gerrymandering to try and work in their favour, because Jacob Rees-Mogg alluded to it, even though it failed. I'm all for doing things to make it easier for people to vote. I'm not so sure that telling people that they have to vote, otherwise they'll face criminal convictions or fines, as they do in Australia, is necessarily the way forward. But I'm willing to have my mind changed on that. I mean, what would you do in an ideal world, Emma? Would you make it compulsory, do you think, or would you keep it where people have the option?
I think where you say it's to make it more accessible would be probably easier, and would work out more, or just stuff like would you be able to do it? Would you be able to vote online or stuff like that? Just stuff like that.
Yeah. There definitely needs to be a change to the system. Interestingly,
go to prison or face a fine or whatever for not voting. I think that's a bit.
Interestingly, speaking of system change, it is actually Labour Party policy to introduce proportional representation. Now, they won't do it because Keir Starmer doesn't want it, but it was just like conference goers voted last week to reverse the plan to means test the winter fuel allowance. Labour members at conference a couple of years ago voted to be in favour of proportional representation and to change the voting system, but the Labour leadership don't want it. That would absolutely see an end to the two-party system, because people wouldn't feel the number of voters that I've spoken to and people that have said, "Oh yeah, I voted for this party because I felt like I had to." It's like, but is it the party that you wanted? And they'll say, "Well, no, actually, I would rather have voted for this or that party. However, realistically, I wanted to." The biggest argument is, I wanted to keep the Tories out, so I voted tactically to keep the Tories out, and that meant voting, say, Lib Dem or Labour, depending on what constituency you were in, where actually they possibly wanted to vote Green, or they wanted to vote Plaid, or they wanted to vote SNP. But instead they've been forced, or they felt like they've been forced to vote for a party that they didn't want to vote for, in order to prevent the other party from getting into power. Any voting system that forces people to vote a way that they don't want to, in order to not get the worst of the two evils, to me is clearly one that doesn't work.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
But yeah. Anyway, speaking of the Labour Party. Indeed. According to polling carried out by More in Common, 7 in 10 Brits say that Labour in power does not really feel like a change from the Conservatives. 66% of all those who were polled say that Labour in power feels the same as the Tories, with only 34% saying it feels different. Now, when broken down by party, only Labour voters are in the group where more than half feel as if Labour in power is any different. But even then, 44% of Labour voters say it doesn't feel like anything's changed at all. When Rachel Reeves spoke to Parliament before the summer recess, George Osborne said that she gave an Osborne-style speech. We've heard talk of tough decisions needing to be made, a difficult budget coming up in a month's time, means testing of the winter fuel allowance, 7 MPs suspended for voting to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, which would lift thousands of children out of poverty. And more recently, we've had we've had revelations of the Labour Party accepting millions of pounds in donations from the Cayman Islands, free clothes for the Prime Minister's wife, and more accusations of corruption and sleaze. Now, I hear a lot of people saying, well, we need to wait for the budget, we need to give time for them to actually prove themselves, etc. But right now, I think I'm with the 7 in 10. What do you think, Emma? Are the Labour Party offering anything different? Is Labour understanding just the Conservatives wearing red? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Hard agree. Just absolutely shit. It is. Nothing has changed. It makes me so angry that Keir Starmer robbed me of the joy of seeing the Tories lose the election. And I've told people it's not going to be any different. He's literally, he's a Tory, and it's not going to be any different. And he's come in, and it's not. And it's like, yeah, like he's making all these cuts, and then making all these excuses that are excuses that I'd hear, or something that I'd hear a Tory say. And it's like, well, why don't you tax your rich friends, you bastard? But yeah, no.
I mean, look, Labour
Nothing's changed.
supporters would argue, certainly those within the the 56% would argue that this is a different Labour Party, that things are different. They would point to things such as the scrapping of the Rwanda bill, for example, as evidence that there is a change to this government. But bear in mind that the Rwanda bill. Well, I mean, yeah. Bear in mind that the Rwanda bill needed to be scrapped. It didn't work. It was
illegal,
and was never going to work in practice anyway, right? But they'd also point to, which I think is a fair point to make. They'd also point to things like the introduction of free breakfast clubs for children from April next year, the COVID corruption inquiry, the Hillsborough Law, Renters' Rights Bill. Things such as that, which are positive, or at least sound positive. Nationalisation of the railway, if it was proper nationalisation, maybe. But there are certain things that people would argue are proof that they are different. But when Keir Starmer came into power, claiming that, well, like the slogan for conference was "Change begins now" or "Change starts now," wasn't it? And or maybe it was just "Change begins." But when they come into power, saying
in the room with us right now,
I've not seen it. Like I said, corruption, sleaze, dodgy funding.
Exactly, chat. Have you seen it? Exactly. Yeah. What's with all these donations? And what? Who's he been having an affair with?
Well, we don't know that he has been. We don't know that he has been. But there are certainly questions being raised around a lot of issues. I mean, something that I'm really upset about and angry about is the sheer determination from the party to hide this £4 million donation that came from the Cayman Islands. For those of you that don't know, this was a donation that was given to the party in the week between Rishi Sunak calling the general election and the beginning of the official period in which donations had to be declared fortnightly as opposed to quarterly, which meant that they wouldn't have to declare this £4 million until when they have done this month. Whereas if it had come a few days later, they would have had to have declared it during the election period. So people would have known before the general election that they just accepted £4 million worth of campaigns funding from a dodgy hedge fund in the Cayman Islands that's linked to fossil fuel companies, for example, amongst other things. So that feels like quite a Tory thing to do to me.
I would just like you all to look at how surprised I am by this information. I'm just so shocked that Keir Starmer would do this. I'm so surprised right now. But yeah, no, it's literally like being under the Tories still. It's the same.
Do I detect a hint of sarcasm in your previous comment there, Emma?
Maybe a little bit, just a little bit. But
Just a little bit. It's
but yeah, no.
difficult. I mean, I would hope that things will improve, but we're seeing, you know, they're saying the opposite, aren't they? You know, they say they want to make things happen, and they want to make change, and then they're proving time and time again they accept dodgy payments. You know, they're hiding where they're getting the funding from. They're taking gifts, ludicrous things that I mean, like the whole football thing, for example. About, you know, accept, oh well, I can't sit in the stalls because security is a problem now. Well, okay, like I get it, fair enough, there might be security concerns, but if it's going to cost the taxpayer, or if you're going to have to accept private gifts otherwise, you know, that are worth fortunes, you know, a stupid amount of money, then that's going to lead to bribery. Because it isn't just, oh, well, we'll help you out so you don't have to have security. Here's a freebie worth thousands of pounds. And while you're at it, you know, that plan that you've got that the FA wouldn't be happy about in terms of regulations in football, can we scrap that so that, you know, that helps us out a bit, because it means that we'll be able to continue to take part in other tournaments, for example, and we'll make sure you see all your Arsenal games. You know, it's things like that. As a disclaimer,
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that is what's happened. I'm speaking hypothetically. That isn't an accusation. However, we know that where money exchange hands, especially, or when gifts of certain values exchange hands, people are more open to bribery. And again, that's exactly what the Conservatives were doing, giving things out, you know, giving contracts out to their mates. I don't know. It just doesn't feel.
Changed? What's changed? Nothing has changed. It is exactly the same. We could have had Jeremy Corbyn. I think about that. That's my Roman Empire. I think about that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you often see these reform voters, and they're like, "Oh, I hope you Labour voters are happy." Listen, we could have had Jeremy Corbyn. We could have had Jeremy Corbyn. Like, you could have voted for Jeremy Corbyn back then, and we probably would have gotten through COVID way better. Like, yeah, just.
I do find it really difficult when I have to agree with reform voters. It was like earlier on in tonight's show when, you know, I was reading some of the statement from Rosie Duffield. Like, I don't disagree with her on a lot of the things that she's saying. Obviously, I think that she's a hypocrite, and, you know, that she's got an ulterior motive there. But it is a strange world that we've come to, where you've got people on the left also agreeing with people on the right when it comes to opinions on the current government.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a sad indictment of what the Labour Party have become, I think. All things considered.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, I don't know what's happened with the time tonight, Emma, but it seems to have just gone by in a whirlwind. I think we're going to have to call it a night there.
No worries.
But yeah, like I say, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I want to thank everyone tonight who tuned in, and everyone who's commented. We do really appreciate it. And I also want to thank Emma, the crafty little witch, for being our guest this evening. Thanks, Emma. Now, remember, if you've enjoyed this live show, you can also support Turn Left by hitting the subscribe button. If you like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. You can support us with a monthly subscription or any one-off donation, but please only give what you can afford and nothing more. Alternatively, help us out by sharing our content, hitting that like button, and telling your friends that we're here. We'll be back on Wednesday for our Conservative Party conference special, so make sure you tune in Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. But until then, my name's Callum Taylor, aka Political. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.